You're not valedictorian material, Elena. Riley has more presence. That's what my mother said after I got the highest GPA in my department. No celebration, no well done. Just a reminder that someone else, my sister, was easier to cheer for. And when graduation day came, they didn't show up. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. Still, I gave the speech. I stood there in front of thousands. 3 empty chairs in the front row, staring back at me. If you've ever spoken your truth to a room that only wanted your silence, leave a 1 below. If you've never had to, be grateful and drop a 0, because this isn't just about a missing audience. It's about finally hearing my own voice. They said they were too tired. I said it was fine. What I didn't say was how many times I'd heard that before. I stood still longer than I needed to. The sun pressed down against the back of my gown, baking through the black fabric like it held a grudge. A light breeze rustled the corners of the programs scattered across the rows, but nothing cooled the weight behind my ribs. I looked out over the folding chairs, hundreds of them, each one a promise of presence, and found the 3 that bore our name. Carter family, neatly printed, center row. A small act of hope. I'd only asked for 3. Not because I expected them to come, but because not asking felt like giving them permission to forget. Carolyn's message came mid-morning. Sorry, honey, just feeling so drained this week. Riley's with me. We'll call later. No punctuation, no warmth, just a digital sign. I replied, okay, and left it at that. I didn't ask if they remembered it was today. I didn't mention the valedictorian title or the years that got me here. There's no good in reminding people of what they've already chosen to ignore. Jesse found me backstage, eyes scanning the clipboard in his hand until he spotted me. You all right? He asked, voice low. The way people speak in hospitals and church foyers. I nodded. Yeah, just waiting on the cue. He didn't press. Jesse never does. That's why I still let him in. I was supposed to sit second from the right on the front stage row, directly behind the podium, perfectly visible for the photographers and live stream. Behind me, 3 empty chairs. I tried not to look at them again. I failed. When the rehearsal broke for lunch, I walked toward the student tent. My phone buzzed. Riley had posted a photo, feet submerged in rose petal water, glasses of Prosecco on a tray, their faces blurred in soft spa light. Caption: Sometimes self-care means skipping the noise. The noise was me, my day, my moment. There was a time, years ago, when Sundays meant Easter service at First United Methodist. Dad would smooth my collar while Mom clipped on her pearls. Riley twirled in her white lace dress, everyone commenting on how darling she looked. I sat in the back seat, fingers folded in my lap, waiting for someone to ask how I liked my yellow dress. No one did. The silence back then was softer. It came dressed in routines and family photos. Now it came through screens, in curated captions, and silence when it mattered. When the dean handed me the valedictorian folder, his voice was kind, detached, but kind. Congratulations, Elena, a remarkable achievement. I said, thank you. I didn't say, no one in my family knows I'm speaking tomorrow. I didn't say, I wrote this speech hoping they'd be proud. I didn't say anything that would stick to the surface of his well-pressed suit. The rehearsal moved on, and I moved with it, one cue after another. Smile, pause, step to the podium, read the name, walk back, sit. Carter family. Still 3 chairs, still untouched. I watched another student gesture to their grandmother's seat, adjusting the program for a better angle. I imagined Carolyn fumbling for her purse and Riley whispering, "Ugh, so hot out," just loud enough for everyone to hear. I imagined things that would never happen, because I'd finally learned how not to expect them. When it ended, I skipped the tent and headed straight for my dorm. The hall was cool and dim, the fluorescent lights flickering like they were tired too. I unlocked my door, dropped my keys in the dish, and pulled the folder from my bag. Inside, the speech. My speech. In the beginning, I rewrote it 3 times. A middle full of quiet metaphors. An ending no one in my family would hear. I hadn't cried, not yet, but something cracked open when I walked back to my dorm and opened the folder with my speech. Mom said I never liked parties, but no one had ever asked what I did like. It was an offhand comment, said over speakerphone while she curled her hair for some charity brunch Riley had invited her to. I remember her voice. Light, a little distracted. You were always so serious, Elena. Always reading. You hated all that noise. I didn't correct her. I just stared at the wall of my dorm, remembering a 16th birthday that barely registered in our family calendar. That year, I got a planner. Leather-bound, a soft slate blue. For the future, the card said. There were no balloons, no cake. Just a whisper of, we'll do something later, and a dinner that never happened. Mom had a work trip. Riley had a dance rehearsal. Dad nodded from behind the newspaper and promised we'd go to Olive Garden next week. We didn't. That night, I journaled in the planner's first page. I listed things I liked: lavender, iced lemon cake, singing in the car. No one asked. No one knew. 3 years later, for Riley's 19th, our backyard was transformed. Fairy lights twinkled across the hedges, rented speakers pulsed with top 40 remixes, and a custom cake in the shape of a Chanel perfume bottle sat on a mirrored stand. Guests arrived in sundresses and polo shirts, carrying bottles of Prosecco and cards with bows. Riley wore a white halter dress, her hair in effortless curls. Mom called her our little star. Dad grilled shrimp skewers with a grin I hadn't seen in years. I helped set the tables: white linens, tiny gold forks, name cards in pink script. I double-checked the playlist Riley had emailed, tied the last lavender ribbon on the gift table, and cleared trash when the bins overflowed. When the lights dimmed for the slideshow, I stood near the back fence, out of the camera frame. Later, Riley handed out thank you cards, each one sealed with a wax stamp. I didn't expect one. Still, when I saw the extra envelopes on the counter, my stomach fluttered. I found mine hours later, unopened, unstamped, in the trash bin beneath torn wrapping paper and half-eaten cake. I picked it up. It was blank inside. My name was on the front, misspelled. "You're the serious one," Mom had said when I mentioned the oversight. "You don't need all this fluff. You're going places." It wasn't meant cruelly. At least, I don't think so. But her words landed like frost. Have you ever stood among your family, yet felt invisible? Not because they forgot you, but because they never truly looked. If that sounds familiar, drop a 7 in the comments. You're seen here. Now let me take you deeper into what came next. She was so certain of who I was. So certain that I didn't need to be seen, just projected into some imagined future of scholarships and spreadsheets. Riley once said, "You build." I sparkle. She laughed after, tossing her hair. It wasn't a dig. Not really. Just a truth she believed, reflected in every party, every holiday, every family photo where I held the camera instead of smiling into it. One Sunday, I remember the smell of roast chicken thick in the air. Dad sat in his recliner, watching 60 Minutes, the volume just loud enough to drown small talk. I stood at the sink, wrists deep in suds, while Riley at the kitchen island painted a sign that read, Riley's Garden Bash, in glitter swirls. She asked Mom for help choosing colors. Mom walked right past me, damp hands and all, to admire Riley's lettering. I never minded washing dishes. It gave my hands something to do. But that night, I scrubbed until my fingers pruned, and no one noticed when I left the room. Some memories aren't loud. They settle in layers, soft, like dust, until one photo, one phrase, blows them back into the air. The spa trip wasn't new. The caption, self-care means skipping the noise, wasn't new either. The pattern had been there all along. I had just stopped naming it. That evening, back at my dorm, I opened an old shoebox I kept beneath my bed. Inside were mementos no one knew I'd saved, programs from school plays, a ribbon from my third-grade science fair, the planner with fading ink. Tucked in the back, flattened and forgotten, was the thank you card from Riley's birthday, the one from the trash. The misspelling looked almost elegant now, like something a stranger would do. The loop of the A in my name didn't quite close, like even the pen had hesitated. I wasn't jealous. I was just uncounted. I'd written the polite version, the one filled with thank yous, but it didn't fit anymore. The cursor blinked on the glowing screen like it was waiting for me to flinch first. I didn't. Not tonight. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The original version of my speech lay folded beside me. 4 neatly typed paragraphs full of smiles and gratitude, the kind that made professors nod and parents tear up. I had practiced it once in the mirror. It sounded like someone else. Someone with a full row of family in the audience. They were too tired, I whispered, not to anyone, just to the room. But they weren't too tired for spa robes and rosé. The caption Riley posted still floated in my mind like a pop-up ad. Sister bonding is self-care. Funny how they only ever bonded when I wasn't around. I opened the speech document again. The glow of my laptop lit the dorm walls like stage lights, harsh and isolating. Everything in the room was still. My desk held the same objects it had all year. A chipped mug from the library book sale, the plant I never remembered to water, the blue pen from Aunt Lois that always left a smudge. Beside the keyboard, a folder marked Commencement waited, polite and expectant. I tapped Select All and hit Delete. The silence afterward wasn't dramatic. It was clean, like clearing a table no one would sit at anyway. Outside, the streetlight buzzed. Inside, my thoughts clicked into place. If this was my moment, I wasn't going to fill it with absence. I was going to write for the ones who showed up even when no one clapped. The ones like me. The first line came slowly. To those who kept showing up even when no one clapped. This is for you. I didn't cry. I just wrote. I wrote about waking up early for classes no one noticed I aced. I wrote about Jessie offering tea and not waiting for a thank you. I wrote about Mrs. Penfield, who once told me in 3rd grade, "You speak like you've been waiting to." That year, I made it to the spelling bee finals. Mom had open house with Riley's art class, so she missed it. I came in 3rd. No ribbon, just a nod from my teacher and a lukewarm juice box. Still, I remember standing at the microphone, heart racing, voice steady. It was the first time I realized showing up meant something, even if no one saw you do it. The clock read 11:42. Tomorrow, I'll walk across the stage. There would be 3 empty chairs with my family's name on them. No clapping from that row, but I'd speak anyway. I leaned back in the chair, letting the silence expand around me. There was a draft from the window I'd cracked open earlier, just enough to hear the trees brushing against each other like restless whispers. Somewhere in the hallway, someone laughed. A distant, happy sound. It didn't touch me. For a moment, I considered writing to Mom. Just a line. Just to say, "You'll hear me speak tomorrow." Or not. But my fingers hovered over the keyboard and then fell away. I knew the silence that would follow. Her silence had 1,000 versions. I didn't see this in time. "I thought it would upset you. You're too sensitive." She used to tell me, "You always take things too personally," as if detachment were some kind of badge. I thought about the thank you section again. In the version I folded away, there were 3 names printed neatly: Carolyn, Dawn, and Riley. Now I stared at the blank line. I thought about adding Jessie. I thought about adding my 3rd-grade teacher, Mrs. Penfield. I ended up writing, "To those who stayed, even when staying came without reward." There was no name attached to that line, but I knew who it was for. The desk lamp flickered once. I tapped it gently, then reached for the navy pen again. Below the printed speech, I started scribbling notes, tiny reminders in the margins. Breathe at second paragraph. Pause after milestones. Don't scan the crowd. I knew I'd look anyway. I'd search for faces that weren't there. And still, I'd speak. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, where I'd stored the red velvet ribbon for my first honor roll certificate. I wrapped it around the new speech, not because it needed decoration, but because I did. I needed something tangible, something of mine. I printed 2 versions, but only one felt like it had blood in it. They clapped, but I didn't hear it. I was focused on the mic, and the 3 empty chairs no one bothered to fill. The morning sun spilled gold across the graduation lawn, catching the tassels of black robes and turning every camera flash into a brief, blinding star. I stood still, breathing in the smell of fresh-cut grass and hairspray, the kind that clung to ambition and last-minute touch-ups. From where I stood, the crowd looked endless, a sea of capped heads and polite anticipation. The dean's voice introduced me with precision, every syllable crisp. I nodded and stepped forward, the paper in my hand feeling heavier than it should. I had printed 2 versions the night before, but only one had left my dorm room with me that morning, the one that bled. 3 chairs, front row, labeled with my family's name, gleamed under the sun. Untouched. I imagined the paper placards curling slightly at the edges from heat. I imagined them blowing away, unclaimed. I took the mic. To those who kept showing up even when no one clapped, this is for you. I didn't pause for applause. I kept going. We're told to be thankful for support, for love, for presence. But what if those things never came? What if the seats meant for your people stayed empty? Not just today, but every milestone before it. Somewhere near the edge of the field, I saw Jesse. His hand was on Tom's shoulder, both of them standing now. Not clapping, not recording, just standing, witnessing. I requested 3 seats, I said. They're still available. I heard a shift in the crowd. Breaths held. The shuffle of programs being lowered. Some of us weren't born into applause. We had to become our own echoes. A memory rushed up. Elementary school, the spelling bee. I had waited at the auditorium's side entrance, 3rd place ribbon in hand, scanning every passing car. I stood alone for nearly 20 minutes until Principal Langley walked by. "Smile, Elena," she'd said, snapping a photo with her Polaroid. That photo sat in a box under my bed, curled and fading. I returned to the present. There are students here today who walked alone to every parent-teacher meeting, who paid their own fees, who learned how to celebrate quietly so it wouldn't look like bragging. This is for them. The podium was warm beneath my palms, grounding me. The paper I read from had a small coffee stain on the edge. Jesse had knocked over his mug last night, apologizing a dozen times. I had told him it was fine. It was just paper. But now that smudge felt like a seal, something real. I looked at the empty seats again. The ache didn't lessen, but it hardened, sharpened into resolve. Have you ever found strength in the silence? That moment when no one shows up, but you do anyway? If you've ever carried yourself through applause no one gave, comment 9 below. Let's see what strength looks like, even when it stands alone. There, I learned that silence can shape you as much as praise. That invisibility doesn't mean you don't exist. It just means you have to reflect your own light. A murmur moved through the graduates. One girl in the second row wiped under her eyes. A boy clenched the hem of his robe. And to the ones who say we're too sensitive, too serious, too much, remember, maybe we had to be. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The message was stitched into every pause, every unspoken word. I could imagine my family watching from somewhere. Carolyn with her Prosecco, Riley half listening while answering DMs, Dawn quiet as ever. They'd recognize themselves. That was enough. I inhaled. So if no one ever saved you a seat, if your name was never called first, if you've ever had to applaud yourself in the mirror, this is your moment too. That's when the clapping returned. Not loud, not immediate, but real. A ripple that turned to a wave. I didn't smile. I simply stepped back. Somewhere behind a screen, they were watching, and this time, they couldn't smile through it. I remembered how, that same day, Riley had a dance recital. Mom had promised to try to make both, but her car never pulled into the parking lot. After Principal Langley took the photo, I walked home. Alone, past the row of cherry trees, clutching a paper bag with my ribbon inside. That walk became a blueprint. Now I stood taller at the podium, not because I felt proud, but because there was no one else to steady me. The sun had shifted, warming the back of my neck. A breeze caught the edge of my robe, and for a second, I imagined what it would have felt like to hear my name shouted from the crowd, the way other families did. But silence has its own kind of applause, one you feel in your bones. Jesse caught my eye again, this time nodding. A small motion, but enough to remind me. Someone chose to stay. I closed the speech without fanfare, just the truth. We arrive, even when no one waits at the door. Then I stepped back. And in the pause that followed, before the applause returned, I thought I heard something else. Not from the crowd, but from within. A small, steady click, like a door finally unlatching. Later, backstage, a student I barely knew approached me. "You said what I never could," she whispered. I nodded. Because I hadn't written the speech for applause. I'd written it so no one else would feel that alone again. It had stayed in the drawer for 3 years. A single envelope, creased at the corner, like it had been waiting. I didn't change out of the graduation gown. The fabric had molded to me, damp where the sun had clung all morning. The quiet of the room was different now, not anticipatory like the night before, but settled, like everything had been said out loud and couldn't be taken back. The mug of tea Jesse brought me sat untouched. Steam is long gone. It smelled faintly of ginger and something floral I couldn't place. I stared at the envelope. It had lived in the top drawer of every desk I'd had since sophomore year, moved dorm to dorm, tucked between expired student IDs and tangled charger cords. Don gave it to me after pancakes one weekend when he visited alone. No fanfare, just a simple, "thought you might want this." Then he asked if the syrup was real maple. For 3 years, I hadn't opened it. I reached for the handle. The drawer stuck, as it always did when humidity kissed the wood. I jiggled it loose and pulled the envelope free. The corner was still bent, as though Don had gripped it too tightly before deciding to let go. The handwriting was his. Small, deliberate. My name curved slightly left. I opened it. You carry more than you show. I see it. I don't always say things right, but I've always been proud of the way you move through the world, even when it's heavy. That was it. No date, no signature, just words. But words I hadn't heard from his mouth. Not once. I sat back. The ceiling fan hummed overhead. From the open window came the muffled strum of acoustic guitar from the cafe across the street. The lazy rhythm of a late afternoon winding down. My phone buzzer. Mom. We watch the stream. Call us when you can. I let the screen fade. Riley. I didn't know you were feeling all that. Don't be so dramatic next time. I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't cry. I just looked back at the letter. The ink had bled slightly in one place, like a finger had lingered too long during writing. I remembered another moment, years ago, when Don had held the back of my bicycle seat as I gobbled down the sidewalk. He hadn't shouted like other dads, just jogged quietly behind me, and when I called out in fear, he said calmly, "Don't look back." "You're steady." He only said it once. But I remembered. This letter felt the same. A single instance of clarity, of being seen. Not celebrated, but seen. Jesse had texted too. You said what some of us never dared. Still, I didn't reply. My fingers traced the folds in the envelope. Each one felt like a moment that had passed without acknowledgement. But this counted. More than the performance, more than the applause. I could have called, I could have explained. But for once, silence felt earned. Not like erasure, but like choice. I didn't call, I didn't reply. I just sat there, rereading the letter and letting it be enough. I kept rereading the letter, not because I didn't understand it, but because some part of me needed to believe it had been real, that Don had really meant it, that the quiet man who never spoke up when Carolyn cut me off at dinner, who always let Riley talk over me, had seen me. Even once. And if he had, then maybe, just maybe, there was some version of a daughter-father thread that hadn't completely frayed. I didn't want to rewrite history, but I needed to know I hadn't imagined the moments. A memory returned uninvited. My 10th birthday, when everyone forgot to get candles. Riley cried because her balloon popped, and Mom spent the whole afternoon comforting her. Don had slipped into the kitchen and stuck 10 birthday candles into a slice of cornbread. Not pretty, he said, lighting each one with a match, but counts just the same. We didn't sing, but he winked when I blew them out. That was enough. I folded the letter carefully, smoothing the creases like tending to a wound. Then I slid it into the top drawer again. Not hidden, but placed. The kind of place you return to, not run from. Outside, a group of students passed by, laughing. One wore a gown like mine, their tassel swinging with every step. I thought about how long it had taken me to feel steady, not successful, not brilliant, just grounded. Not needing their applause anymore, or their permission to exist. The tea had gone cold completely. I poured it out and let the sound fill the silence. I didn't call, I didn't explain. I stayed still and let the quiet hold me. It took me 22 years to take a photo that didn't need anyone's approval. The light in my new apartment hits differently in the morning. It doesn't rush in, it wanders, curious, bouncing off the chipped white walls and creaking softly across the floorboards like it's figuring me out. The third floor of a Capitol Hill walk-up wasn't where I expected to land, but it's where I finally feel like I'm standing on my own name. That first morning, I brewed a cup of Earl Grey with mint and opened the window a crack. From downstairs, someone was already grinding beans, the scent of coffee threading its way up like a familiar tune. I set a small vase of tulips on the kitchen table, a purchase from the weekend farmer's market, and took a photo with my phone. No one asked me to smile, and I didn't wonder who'd see it. That was new. Later that week, Riley texted me, just, "In town? Lunch?" There was no apology buried in it. No congrats or sorry we missed it. But she came. We met at Union Market. I got there first and chose a small table near the edge where I could watch the light shift across people's faces. She arrived in a linen dress and sandals, looking breezy and curated, but not sharp, just tentative. "Hey," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Hey," I echoed. We didn't talk about graduation, or speeches, or spa trips. We talked about rent prices and matcha lattes, and whether DC summers were more bearable than Virginia ones. She mentioned she might be looking at jobs up here. I told her about the bookstore I was eyeing 2 blocks from my place. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel either. She looked around the market like she wasn't sure how to end the moment. Then, "We're different, but maybe that's okay now?" I didn't respond. Not with words. I just nodded once, slowly. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation back. It was acknowledgement. When I got home, I made tea again. The sun had shifted, painting golden squares onto the wood floor. I opened my phone and looked at the photo I'd taken that morning. The tulips, the chipped table, the soft shadows. I was in the corner of the frame, just barely, half a smile curling on my lips. And I realized I wasn't smiling for anyone, just existing and smiling anyway. That night, I stayed up later than usual. I rearranged the few books I owned on a narrow shelf someone left in the hallway, lit a small candle I'd bought on impulse, and played a Miles Davis record I found at a weekend flea market. The sound crackled like it belonged to someone older than me, and maybe that's why it felt right. There was something sacred about the quiet, not the kind that followed disappointment, but the kind I had chosen. I stood barefoot in my kitchen, holding the last of the tea, and looked at the photo again. It wasn't centered, it wasn't perfect, but for once, it didn't matter if anyone else saw it or liked it. When I was younger, I used to wait for people to tag me. In photos, in family memories, in casual conversations. I wanted proof I belonged somewhere, that I'd been seen. But the truth was, some people never look your way, no matter how close you stand. Earlier that day, as Riley picked at her lunch, she'd said, "I think we misunderstood each other. Maybe I still do." She didn't say it as a defense, just a fact. I had thought about asking why no one came, about the spa, the silence, the stream, but I didn't. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally realized no answer would change what happened. And more importantly, it wouldn't change me. When she left, she didn't hug me, but she did linger. Her eyes flicked back once as she walked away. That small pause felt like the closest we'd ever come to truce. I washed my mug slowly, hands submerged in warm water. I remembered the smell of lemon dish soap from our old house in Fairfax County, and how, on quiet Sundays, I would scrub plates while Riley painted signs for her birthday parties. Carolyn would walk through with her phone, and Dawn would tap the news volume down. And I, Elena, would be there. Part of the picture, but never the focus. Until now. Now, I was the one holding the camera. I posted the tulip photo to my new account. No caption, no hashtags, just the moment. Then I sat at the window and watched dusk slip in, gentle and assured. This wasn't a grand triumph. No cinematic swell of music, just a quiet beginning. A morning I owned, a lunch shared without apology, a photo that needed no one's approval to matter. That photo wasn't for them. It was for the girl who used to wait by the phone. And this time, she didn't wait. I used to think being overlooked was the worst kind of hurt. But over time, I've come to see that silence, when met with honesty, can shape something softer than bitterness. It can shape peace. I've learned that not all families mend, and not all truths are welcomed. But speaking mine allowed me to stop shrinking for spaces I never fit. Maybe healing isn't about reunion, it's about release. If my story found its way to you, maybe take a quiet moment today to honor the part of you that kept going, even when no one noticed. And if any part of this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your reflections in the comments, and feel free to subscribe to join me for the next one. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.